The ambient clinking of heavy sterling silver against fine imported porcelain always carried a distinct, suffocating rhythm inside the grand dining room of the Morrison estate. The air was thick with the heavy scents of roasted rack of lamb, vintage French Bordeaux, and the unyielding, invisible weight of a generational patriarchy that had never known the concept of a boundary. Outside the towering, arched windows, the crisp autumn wind swept across the pristine, manicured lawns of the historic Victorian mansion, casting long, dancing tree shadows against the velvet draperies. I sat perfectly still near the center of the long, linen-draped banquet table, my fingers lightly resting against the stem of a water glass, my simple, unbranded silk blouse standing out like a muted shadow against the sea of designer tuxedos and glittering diamond necklaces that decorated my in-laws. Across the dark expanse of the polished mahogany table sat the billionaire patriarch of the family business, Vincent Morrison, his weathered hands gripping the arms of his high-backed leather chair with an calculated air of supreme dominance. Vincent was a man who had spent 40 years running a massive, over-leveraged commercial real estate development empire, a proud, narcissistic tycoon whose entire psychological architecture was built on the absolute subjection of others. To his right sat his son, Isaac, my husband of 3 years, a brilliant but quietly suffocating architect who had spent his entire adult life struggling to survive beneath the crushing, heavy thumb of his father's emotional manipulation. Vincent slowly stood up from his seat, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over the entire assembly of wealthy aunts, uncles, and corporate partners who had gathered for the annual family milestone dinner. He lifted his crystal goblet, a cold, predatory smile playing across his lips as his sharp, penetrating gray eyes locked directly onto my calm, serene face. "We have reached a critical historical junction for the Morrison lineage this evening," Vincent announced, his deep, gravelly voice booming through the silent room with an arrogant, unchecked authority that instantly silenced the nearby conversations. "Our flagship $15 million downtown Crowne Plaza development project is officially scheduled for its groundbreaking ceremony this upcoming Monday morning. A masterwork that will permanently secure our family's corporate legacy for the next half-century." But as I look around this table, celebrating our immense operational expansion, I am continuously reminded of the severe, structural mistakes that threaten the purity of our legacy. Vincent set his glass down with a sharp, echoing thud that made the fine china rattle against the wood, his eyes narrowing into cold, razor-sharp slits of pure contempt as he gestured a manicured hand directly at my chest. "I am speaking explicitly about you, Ruth," my father-in-law sneered, his tone dripping with a weaponized, public malice designed to inflict the absolute maximum amount of psychological execution. "For 3 long years, you have crawled through the halls of this pristine Victorian estate, a nameless, worthless piece of lower-class trash who brought absolutely nothing but a generic state college degree and an empty pocket to my son's marriage. You work your quiet, invisible remote administrative jobs in the corner of our guest rooms, contributing 0 liquid equity and 0 social status to the Morrison corporate network. You are a biological parasite who successfully managed to trap my brilliant son into a domestic union, and you do not deserve to share the luxury oxygen of a family that builds empires. I have officially instructed our family estate attorneys to draft a total, non-negotiable post-nuptial asset exclusion agreement, and if you refuse to sign away your marital claims by Monday morning, I will personally ensure Isaac terminates this marriage and leaves you on the street with absolutely nothing." The room descended into an absolute, suffocating silence, the wealthy relatives and corporate partners sitting entirely paralyzed, several of my sister-in-laws offering soft, dismissive snickers behind their silk napkins as they watched the public humiliation. Isaac violently bolted upright from his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of pale white as his fists clenched against the tablecloth, his voice breaking with a desperate, defensive fury. "Father, stop this immediately. You have absolutely no right to speak to my wife with this level of public cruelty," Isaac shouted, his chest heaving as he tried to shield my position from the head of the table. Ruth has spent the last 3 years supporting my architectural schedules, enduring your constant emotional isolation, and keeping our household stable while you force me to work 80-hour weeks for your corporate vanity. Vincent dismissively waved his hand, a cold, patronizing chuckle escaping his lips as he looked down at his son with an unyielding, patriarchal dominance that cut through Isaac's defense like a physical blade. "Sit down, Isaac, and learn how a real sovereign commander handles the domestic liabilities of his house," Vincent barked, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying growl. "Your wife is a financial zero, a penniless non-entity who should be on her knees thanking this household for the very food resting on her plate, and her silence tonight is the only intelligent trait she possesses." I sat perfectly still at my defense table, my heart rate entirely steady, a freezing, dangerous tactical calm descending deep into the hidden chambers of my soul as the final threads of my human patience for the Morrison bloodline broke away forever. They believed they were witnessing the total psychological collapse of a submissive, broken daughter-in-law who would spend the rest of the night weeping into her handkerchief before signing their exclusionary legal papers out of fear. They completely, hilariously underestimated the absolute, terrifying reality of the woman who had been sitting quietly at their dinner table for 3 continuous years. With a smooth, calculated, and entirely mechanical precision, I reached down, took my white linen napkin, and folded it into a neat, perfect square before placing it quietly on the edge of my clean plate. I stood up from my chair, my posture completely upright, my expression carrying an ice-cold serenity that radiated a strange, unshakable sovereignty through the silent, frozen room. I didn't scream, I didn't let a single tear alter the geometry of my face, and I didn't waste a single second offering a defensive paragraph to a man who measured human worth in superficial country club prestige. I looked directly into the bulging, arrogant eyes of my father-in-law, Vincent Morrison, a soft, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips as I took a slow, deliberate breath. "The dinner was highly instructional, Vincent," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying an immense, crystalline resonance that echoed clearly through the silent rafters of the Victorian estate. "I hope you enjoy the remaining moments of your celebratory evening, because the architectural rules of your empire are about to undergo a very sudden, structural reevaluation." I turned around without waiting for a single reply, walking down the center aisle of the grand dining room with a slow, graceful, and entirely definitive stride, the heavy oak double doors closing behind my exit with a soft, hollow thud. Isaac immediately abandoned his seat, ignoring his father's furious commands to remain in the room, and followed me out into the freezing autumn night as I stepped toward my vehicle. "Ruth, please, wait for me. I am packing my bags. I am leaving this estate with you tonight," Isaac pleaded, his hands trembling as he reached to open the passenger door, his loyalty to our marriage completely overriding his fear of his father's wrath. I looked at my husband, noting the real, unforced love and the total shock in his eyes, and I offered him a gentle, reassuring touch against his cold cheek. "Get into the car, Isaac," I instructed softly, my tone carrying an unshakable confidence that instantly calmed his panic. "You have spent 3 years executing beautiful designs for a father who treats you like an asset. Tonight, it's time to watch how an independent firm executes a real corporate restructuring." I pulled my smartphone from my purse as the vehicle surged away from the gates of the Morrison estate, my fingers moving across the screen with a rapid, programmatic precision as I dialed a secure, encrypted direct line. The call was answered on the first microsecond bounce by my high-priced primary corporate attorney and global compliance director, Arthur Pendleton. "Chief Executive Officer Peterson, I assume the holiday dinner has reached its definitive conclusion," Arthur's voice announced through the secure Bluetooth speaker system, his tone shifting instantly into a rigid, defensive professional alert. "The holiday dinner is officially closed, Arthur, and the Morrison bloodline has officially crossed the absolute boundary of our compliance tolerances," I commanded, my voice flat, level, and entirely cold. "I want you to activate the primary protocol immediately. Contact our institutional escrow desk and draft a total, unilateral funding withdrawal notice for the $15 million downtown Crown Plaza development project." terminate our capital injection lines, freeze our blind asset pools, and issue an immediate cancellation of the groundbreaking clearance certificates before the market opens on Monday morning. Arthur Pendleton let out a low, professional chuckle of pure, calculated satisfaction on the other end of the wire. The notices will be formally filed with the state regulatory boards and the primary lending banks by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, boss, Arthur replied smoothly. Vincent Morrison has been running his entire development empire on our liquidity for 18 months. He has absolutely no idea that he's been insulting the very sovereign who pays his mortgage. A massive, spectacular financial plot twist was officially in flight, a masterstroke of undercover wealth that I had guarded with absolute, mechanical secrecy since the very day Isaac and I first exchanged our vows. Vincent and his high society partners believed I was a penniless data entry clerk because I chose to maintain a quiet, modest profile to ensure my marriage with Isaac was built on a foundation of pure character rather than the corrupting influence of family capital. In reality, I was the secretive multimillionaire founder, majority shareowner, and chief executive officer of Crystalia Holdings, an elite global venture capital and asset management conglomerate that controlled over $300 million in prime international real estate equity. 18 months prior, Vincent's commercial development empire had hit a catastrophic, silent wall of post-pandemic debt contractions, leaving his firm on the absolute brink of an unpunishable federal bankruptcy liquidation. Desperate to protect my husband's future inheritance lines without exposing my true identity to a narcissistic father-in-law who would have immediately tried to plunder my treasury, I had utilized Crystalia Holdings to execute a silent rescue. Operating through an intricate network of anonymous corporate shell companies, blind trusts, and secondary institutional proxies, Crystalia Holdings had quietly bought out Vincent's defaulting banknotes, providing a massive $15 million capital injection to fund the downtown Crowne Plaza project. Vincent believed that the mysterious, anonymous sovereign firm backing his high-rise development was an elite syndicate of foreign investors who worshipped his executive vision from afar. He had been bragging to his country club peers about his natural financial brilliance, completely blind to the fact that his entire commercial survival was being privately subsidized by the very daughter-in-law he branded as worthless trash. He had spent 3 years treating me like a disposable parasite while his luxury sports cars, his corporate offices, and the very Victorian estate he lived in were being kept solvent by my private underwriting desk. The countdown officially commenced on Monday morning as the economic machinery of my financial retribution descended upon the Morrison firm with the unstoppable, crushing velocity of a natural law. At precisely 8 o'clock, while Vincent was sitting behind his massive mahogany office desk downtown, adjustments his silk tie as he prepared to step into the grand opening press conference, the terminal systems violently crashed. The primary institutional lenders and the major municipal construction boards received the formal, certified funding withdrawal notices from Crystalia Holdings. The $15 million escrow pool vanished from the project registers within a matter of seconds, leaving the Crowne Plaza development with an absolute capital deficit of zero liquid liquidity. The municipal regulators immediately executed a total, non-negotiable regulatory suspension on the groundbreaking ceremony, ordering the heavy construction crews and the architectural teams to drop their tools and vacate the site. The sudden, catastrophic cancellation of the flagship high-rise project triggered an immediate, violent domino effect across the entire multi-layered network of Vincent's over-leveraged commercial portfolio. Because Vincent had cross-collateralized his older office buildings, his luxury retail plazas, and the historic Victorian family mansion to secure the auxiliary performance bonds for the Crowne Plaza development, the sudden lack of capital activated a series of severe, automatic cross-default clauses. The primary institutional banks and predatory mezzanine creditors panicked, realizing that the Morrison empire was a completely hollowed-out shell that had been floating on an invisible cushion of anonymous venture capital. By 10 o'clock that morning, a massive wave of immediate foreclosure notices, asset repossession orders, and multi-million-dollar investor lawsuits were formally delivered to the Morrison headquarters by local court couriers. The stock value of the Morrison development firm plummeted into an absolute, bottomless abyss, losing over 65% of its structural equity within less than 2 hours of the opening bell. Vincent's phone lines were completely paralyzed, showing dozens of frantic notifications from wealthy country club partners who were loudly demanding the immediate return of their personal investments. The unearned world of privilege and patriarchal delusion that my father-in-law had used as a weapon of superiority for 40 years was violently dissolving into pure, unadulterated public ash before his eyes. The dramatic climax of the corporate warfare erupted at precisely 1 o'clock that afternoon inside the sprawling, high-security executive penthouse suite of Chris D'Elia Holdings downtown. I sat calmly behind a massive, sleek white quartz executive desk, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the entire city skyline, the room filled with the soft aroma of fresh espresso and wild lavender. Beside my chair stood Isaac, his posture completely relaxed, his eyes scanning the real-time financial tracking charts displaying the total, systematic liquidation of his father's over-leveraged company. The heavy, soundproofed glass double doors of my office suite were suddenly violently thrown open, and Vincent Morrison stormed into the room like a wounded, psychotic predator escaping an execution cell. He was flanked by his senior vice presidents and corporate attorneys, his face a grotesque mask of exhausted gray ash, his expensive Italian suit completely rumpled and slick with a frantic, desperate sweat. "Where is the chief executive officer of this fraudulent syndicate?" Vincent roared, slamming his closed fist against the quartz counter of the reception desk as his eyes darted around the luxurious room. "Your anonymous investment firm has just executed an illegal, unconstitutional breach of contract against the Crown Plaza development. You have frozen my corporate accounts and destroyed 40 years of my family legacy without a single day of notice. I demand to see the sovereign managing director of Chris D'Elia Holdings right now, or my legal team will file a massive multi-million-dollar racketeering lawsuit that will land your directors in a federal prison cell." I slowly turned my high-backed leather executive chair to face the entranceway, a calm, serene smile spreading across my lips as I took a measured sip of my black coffee. "You are currently staring directly at the sovereign managing director of Chris D'Elia Holdings, Vincent," I announced, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying an ice-cold resonance that struck the room like a physical bolt of lightning. The arrogant patriarch instantly violently froze mid-step, his jaw dropping open as his eyes bulged in an absolute, breathless horror, his mind frantically struggling to process the total collapse of his reality. He looked from my tailored, high-end designer executive blazer up to the grand, marble-rimmed wall behind my desk, where my dual master's degrees in corporate compliance and financial risk architecture from the Wharton Business School hung under custom museum glass. Beside the diploma sat a massive, gold-embossed corporate plaque documenting the historic foundation of Chris D'Elia Holdings, listing my legal name, Ruth Peterson, as the sole primary founder and absolute owner of the entire empire. "Ruth, no. This is a complete, impossible hallucination," Vincent stammered, his polished, synthetic voice dropping into a weak, unstable pitch as he backed away from the desk, his hands shaking violently. "You are a low-level data clerk. You are the penniless orphan who trapped my son into a basic apartment marriage. You cannot possibly hold an institutional credit registry of this magnitude." Isaac stepped forward from behind the desk, looking his father dead in the eyes with an intense, unyielding disgust that permanently broke the final chains of his patriarchal control. "She didn't trap me into anything, father. She spent 10 years building the most powerful venture capital firm in the state while you were busy spending your company's retirement reserves to fund your unearned country club vanity," Isaac said, his tone carrying an absolute finality. "You stood up at your dinner table 48 hours ago and branded my wife as worthless trash who didn't deserve to share your luxury oxygen, completely blind to the fact that her private treasury was the only thing preventing the banks from foreclosing on your house 18 months ago. You wanted a submissive, broke daughter-in-law to run over with your legal post-nuptial exclusions, and you managed to walk yourself straight into the jaws of the very sovereign who owns your entire mortgage ledger." I tapped a single key on my centralized desktop terminal activating a high-fidelity media presentation screen that illuminated the boardroom wall with a series of cold, forensic financial bank files. The documents displayed the matching routing numbers of his primary real estate shell companies, tracing the precise data paths proving how RiseProject Holdings had quietly subsidized his operations. These are the certified default summaries for every single piece of commercial property carrying the Morrison name. Vincent, I stated with a mathematical precision that silenced his cries completely. Because your over-leveraged firm has experienced an absolute capital default due to the funding withdrawal this morning, the cross-collateralization clauses have fully matured. RiseProject Holdings has officially purchased your outstanding primary bank liabilities, and our legal team has just finalized the filings to execute a total asset repossession on your entire corporate infrastructure. Your executive titles are stripped from the registry, your corporate offices are legally closed, and the historic Victorian estate you live in belongs unilaterally and entirely to my private real estate portfolio effective 20 minutes ago. You have exactly 60 seconds to pack your briefcases and vacate my penthouse suite before my corporate security detail has you forcefully removed from the building for criminal trespassing. Vincent fell heavily against the mahogany conference chairs near the doorway, his eyes hollow, his face a mask of complete, unadulterated psychological defeat as the full weight of his public ruin settled deep into his chest. His high-priced corporate attorneys didn't offer a single word of legal defense. They hurriedly gathered their files and walked out of the office suite, completely desperate to distance their firms from the toxic stench of his bankruptcy. The arrogant patriarch who had spent 40 years terrorizing his household and treating my existence like a secondary convenience was left standing alone in the shadows of the hallway, a completely broken, socially dead outcast who possessed absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back. The chronological, satisfying collapse of Vincent Morrison's unearned empire unfolded over the subsequent 12 months with the mechanical, relentless precision of a natural law. Because the forensic data trail of his financial overleverage and cross-collateralization fraud was completely airtight, the state bankruptcy courts initiated an immediate, total liquidation sequence on his assets. The pristine Victorian estate that had functioned as the central theater of his patriarchal vanity was sold at a public auction to pay back the remaining balance of the corporate liabilities he owed to my trust. A team of uniformed county sheriffs arrived at the grand iron gates of the mansion in broad daylight, executing the asset repossession orders and clearing out his luxury personal items, while the local business press captured every single second of the public execution. His collection of imported luxury sports cars, his private country club memberships, and his high society real estate deeds were systematically repossessed and liquidated by the lenders to satisfy the mounting investor lawsuits. The local business community and the elite financial circles of the valley, who had once preened in front of his mahogany desk, completely blacklisted his name from their networks within less than 30 days of the viral news broadcast. They tore up his historical consulting proposals and canceled his advisory luncheons, desperate to protect their own brands from the public scorn of a tycoon who had been completely outmaneuvered by his own undercover target. Vincent was forced to move out of his luxury suburban paradise entirely, downsizing into a tiny, modest two-bedroom rental apartment located on the industrial outskirts of the valley where the heavy freight trains shook the thin walls at all hours of the night. The man who had spent decades measuring human worth exclusively in percentage returns was forced to live out his remaining retirement years in absolute obscurity and social isolation, surviving on the meager, bitter returns of a small state pension that his lawyers couldn't protect. The pacing of my life with Isaac slowed down beautifully over the subsequent years, allowing the white-hot corporate warfare to transition into a continuous current of pure serenity and absolute personal triumph. We moved forward completely detached from their malice, utilizing our shared architectural and compliance talents to build a beautiful, independent legacy on our own terms. We established a premier, sustainable design and infrastructure development corporation that flourished on the international stage, building high-end, eco-friendly residential sanctuaries that captured the respect of global markets. Our new personal home was a stunning, sun-filled architectural masterpiece located on a peaceful coastal cliff far away from the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of the Morrison household. The property featured massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over the rolling, sapphire blue currents of the ocean, the rooms filled with the soft aroma of fresh espresso, beautiful literature, and true clarity. There were no arrogant fathers-in-law demanding post-nuptial exclusions or calculating my net worth over dinner plates, and there was no toxic obligation to sacrifice our youth to feed the vanity of a parasitic patriarch. Isaac spent his mornings sketching magnificent new designs in his private, sun-filled studio pavilion, his posture entirely relaxed, his mind completely liberated from the heavy trauma of his childhood conditioning. As I stand on the private observation deck of our beautiful coastal home this evening, watching the sunset paint the Pacific sky in vibrant shades of gold and deep violet, a profound, permanent sense of total victory settles into my soul. I had turned the coldest family arrogance and public humiliation into a flawless masterpiece of pure self-worth, completely owning my life and my husband's future on my own terms. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child, the partner, or the dedicated worker whose silence, boundaries, and hard work have been systematically weaponized or ignored by the parasites in your home, hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your true worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial fraud, emotional neglect, or public humiliation for the sake of an artificial family peace that only serves the thieves in your world. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for status, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future destiny. My funding withdrawal was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of corporate strategy that permanently shielded my family from the hands of white-collar traders. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.